Keith Urban's jaw tightened as the echo of Kelly's challenge hung in the air. The audience, sensing they were witnessing something unscripted and raw, leaned forward in their seats. The cameras caught the faint twitch in his eyebrow, the kind of micro-expression that said more than any words could. Kelly, her arms crossed in a defensive but defiant stance, looked like someone ready to go 12 rounds, not in a boxing ring, but with the weight of years of public perception pressing on her shoulders. The producers in the control room were panicking, their voices layered over each other through the earpieces of the hosts. Move on now, one instructed sharply, but it was already too late. The conversation had taken on a life of its own, the kind that no pre-show briefing could have predicted or controlled. I just think, Kelly began again, her voice steady but with a razor's edge, that when you're in a position like yours, selling out arenas, being on every award show, you have a responsibility to be honest with the people who've supported you from day one. And sometimes I wonder if you've forgotten that. There was an audible murmur from the crowd. Keith's lips parted slightly, then closed again, as if weighing each word before he let it out. He placed his hands on the edge of the desk, between them, leaning in just enough to erase the comfortable distance that usually exists between interviewee and host. You're questioning my honesty. Keith's voice was quieter than before, but somehow it carried more power. The soundboard tech instinctively dialed his mic level down, worried the tension might crackle through the speakers. Kelly, I've been nothing but open about who I am, about my music, about my mistakes. What you're doing right now, it's not about honesty, it's about control. Kelly blinked, the accusation hitting her harder than she expected. Control, she repeated, forcing a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. Keith, the only thing I've ever tried to control is making sure the people watching aren't being fed a packaged, polished version of reality. She gestured toward him with an open palm. You've built a brand on being relatable, on being the guy next door. But the Keith I see here, right now, doesn't want to answer for anything real. The temperature in the studio seemed to drop. Even the audience's breathing felt synchronized, as if they didn't want to interrupt. The lighting, set to warm amber for comfort, now only cast deeper shadows on both of their faces. Keith pushed back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Maybe the problem is that you think my reel has to match your version of it. Maybe the problem is, you don't know me as well as you think you do. A tense beat passed. Kelly's smile faltered just slightly, until Keith noticed, and he pressed forward. You've been in this industry long enough to know that the camera catches one part of the truth. The rest of it, the late nights, the fights, the choices, that's not for public consumption. Kelly shook her head. I disagree, because those choices shape the art, and if you hide the truth, you're hiding the heart of the music. That's not authenticity, Keith, that's theater. The word theater hung in the air like smoke. Keith's fans knew how much he prided himself on avoiding gimmicks, and Kelly's choice to use it was a calculated strike. The audience gasped again, not because they were shocked she said it, but because they knew it would get under his skin. Keith leaned forward again, his forearms resting on the desk. You want authenticity? Fine, here's some truth for you. I didn't come on this show to be put on trial. I came here because I thought we were celebrating music, connecting with people, and sharing stories, not to have my integrity sliced apart under the studio lights. Kelly didn't flinch. Sometimes integrity needs a little daylight. That's how people know it's real. The control room's frantic chatter was growing louder. We've got to cut to commercial. A producer barked, but the floor manager, caught between orders and the undeniable electricity of the moment, hesitated. This was TV gold, the kind of segment that would be replayed for days, dissected on social media, turned into headlines before the hour was over. Keith sat back, crossing his arms now, mirroring Kelly's earlier stance. So, let me ask you, if the roles were reversed, would you put your entire life on display? Every argument, every bad decision, every moment you wish you could take back. Kelly paused. She hadn't expected the question to come back at her with that kind of precision. If it helped someone feel less alone, she said finally, then yes, I would. The silence that followed was thick, almost uncomfortable. Keith studied her for a moment, as if trying to decide whether he believed her. Then, maybe, he said slowly, that's where we're different. A ripple went through the audience. Not applause, not gasps, just a collective exhale. Kelly tilted her head slightly, a mixture of curiosity and challenge in her expression. Maybe it is, she agreed. The floor manager finally gave the cut signal, and the show abruptly went to commercial. The upbeat music and sponsor graphics felt jarringly out of place after what had just unfolded. But off camera, the tension didn't fade. Keith took a sip of water, his hands steady, but his eyes locked on Kelly as if the conversation wasn't over. Kelly glanced down at her notes, though it was clear she wasn't reading them. The crew moved around them, resetting for the next segment, but the two remained in that locked stare, a silent acknowledgement that something had shifted. When the cameras came back, both wore polite smiles, but the audience could sense the undercurrent. The scripted banter returned, but it was thinner now. stripped of the easy chemistry that usually defined a talk show segment. Keith played along with a few light-hearted questions. But every now and then, his gaze flickered back to Kelly with an intensity that suggested unfinished business. Kelly, for her part, didn't retreat from the moment. If anything, she leaned into it, asking about his tour with an almost surgical precision, as if daring him to slip. And while the segment eventually wrapped, and the applause rolled in, everyone from the viewers at home to the crew behind the scenes knew they'd just witnessed the opening act of something much bigger. This wasn't the kind of clash that ended with a handshake and a photo op. This was the kind that simmered. The kind that came back later, louder. The tension in the studio hung in the air like the aftershock of a lightning strike. Keith Urban stood there, jaw tight, breathing sharp, his hand still gripping the edge of the chair he had just left. Kelly Clarkson's voice cut through the murmuring audience like a sudden chord change no one expected, steady, but tinged with something deeper, something that was no longer just host mode. "Keith," she said, leaning forward slightly, "you can walk away if you want to. You can throw your chair across the stage if that's your way of dealing with this. But don't pretend this is just about me asking a question. This is about you not wanting to face the fact that people are talking, and you hate when you're not controlling the story." Urban froze mid-step, his boots planted just shy of the curtain leading off stage. The crew's eyes darted between them, unsure if they should intervene or let the moment burn itself out. The audience, half stunned, half electrified, sat in perfect silence. Keith slowly turned, his eyes locking on Kelly's. "You think you know me? You think after all these years in the industry, you've got me figured out? You know nothing about what I've had to sacrifice to be where I am." Kelly didn't flinch. "I know enough to recognize when someone's building walls so high they can't even see over them anymore. You came here to promote a tour, a record, but deep down, you know this conversation isn't about any of that. It's about you, not wanting anyone to touch the parts of your story that scare you." Keith's voice hardened. "What scares me is people like you who think you're doing the world a favor by dragging people's personal lives into the spotlight under the guise of honesty." Kelly set her cards down on the desk. The scripted questions were useless now. This had gone somewhere no producer had planned. "And what scares me," she shot back, "is artists I admire pretending that telling the truth is some kind of trap. You've built a career on songs that bleed honesty, Keith, so why is it suddenly too much when the spotlight turns on you?" He took a step closer, his boots echoing across the polished stage floor. "Because there's a difference between singing your truth and having it twisted by someone else for ratings." Kelly rose from her chair now, her voice steady but her posture tense. "You think I'm twisting it, or are you just afraid of what happens when people see that the man on stage isn't always the man off stage?" The audience shifted, the discomfort palpable. It was no longer a lighthearted interview. This was raw, dangerous television. The cameras zoomed in, catching the tightness around Keith's mouth, the flicker in his eyes that betrayed more than he wanted. "I came here to celebrate music," he said finally, his tone quieter now but carrying the weight of steel. "Not to be cornered into defending my character." Kelly took a slow breath. "Then why does it feel like you're running from it instead of standing in it?" Keith's silence spoke louder than any rebuttal. He looked down, then back up, and for a moment there was something almost vulnerable in his face, something that wasn't anger, but exhaustion. "You know what, Kelly?" he said, his voice low. "I've fought my whole life to keep the parts of me that matter safe. My marriage, my family, my sobriety. Every time someone tries to chip away at that, I have to decide whether to let them in or shut them out completely. Today, I'm choosing to shut this down." Kelly didn't move. "And tomorrow?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. Instead, Keith gave one last glance at the cameras, then at the audience, and walked straight off stage. The crew parted like water around him. The sound of the stage door closing behind him seemed to echo in the stillness. For several seconds, the studio was frozen. Kelly looked toward the audience, 1,000 unspoken things in her eyes. "Well," she said finally, forcing the smallest of smiles, "I guess that's one way to end an interview." The audience gave an uneasy laugh, unsure if they were supposed to clap. Some did, some didn't. The band started to play a gentle fill, trying to transition into the next segment. But the energy was fractured, the kind of rupture that lingers long after the cameras stop rolling. Backstage, Keith moved quickly toward the exit, his hands shaking despite himself. His manager was already waiting with a look that blended frustration and worry. "Keith, we need to talk about not now." Keith cut him off, pushing past. He needed air. In the green room, his phone was buzzing, texts from friends, from fellow musicians, from his wife. He didn't read them. He knew the headlines were already being written. Keith Urban walks out on Kelly Clarkson. He knew the clips would go viral before he even made it to his car. Meanwhile, on stage, Kelly wrapped the show with her usual charm, but anyone watching closely could see the faint tremor in her hand as she held the mic. As soon as the cameras cut, she sat back in her chair, staring at the empty space Keith had left behind. One of her producers approached cautiously. "You okay?" Kelly let out a breath that felt like it had been stuck in her chest all afternoon. "Yeah," she said, "but that one's gonna follow us." It did. Within an hour, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok were flooded with clips of the exchange. Hashtags like hashtag Keith vs. Kelly, hashtag walkout, and hashtag truth hurts trended worldwide. Fans were divided. Some defended Keith, saying Kelly had pushed too hard. Others praised Kelly for holding her ground. Every frame of the confrontation was dissected, analyzed, and debated. By the next morning, both Keith and Kelly had issued carefully crafted statements. Keith's emphasizing the importance of boundaries, Kelly's highlighting the value of open dialogue. But neither statement could capture the raw, unfiltered reality of what had happened in that studio. Because the truth was, for both of them, that day had crossed a line, and no amount of PR could erase it.